Friends, I am just over the moon about who we have here on the show today. I'm sitting here with my new friend, if I may be so bold, Dr. Meg Jay. And Dr. Jay, Meg, as you said, I could call you. Tell me, tell us who you are, what you do, and a fun fact about yourself.
Okay. My name is Meg Jay. I'm a clinical psychologist and I specialize in twentysomethings. I wrote The Defining Decade and the Twentysomething Treatment, which we'll talk about today. Fun fact about me, which is 20-something related, is that when COVID broke out, I was in the South China Sea with 500 20-somethings, and we were stranded at sea after that until... well, for a good couple months.
A good couple months?
Yeah. So
were you on semester at sea or something?
Yeah, I was. I was teaching on semester at sea. I was teaching positive psychology of all things. And we sailed around and looked for countries to take us in and found virtually none. But it was a very fun, cool COVID story. And I was trapped with 500 of my favorite age group. So
were you on the ship as a guest, I'll be here for a week speaker, or had you signed up for a semester?
I'd signed up for the whole thing. I brought my kids. We were going to see the world. And we spent the first 3 weeks crossing the Pacific, which was super cool. And then we got to Japan and we spent 4 days in Japan. And then we got a message on our cell phones when we were in Japan that there was this, strange flu-like illness in China, which was our next stop. So we said, okay, we'll skip China. And, then we're good, right? Because we'll just skip China and then we're fine. And so we sailed another 2 weeks-ish. I can't remember now. Got to Vietnam. And then, everything really blew up over there. This was in February, so it was before here, in the U.S. And so then another country didn't let us in until Africa. Until we were South Africa was the next country that let us in. So we were sailing around from Vietnam to South Africa.
When did you finally get home?
We were let off in South Africa, and they, the powers that be rightly said to the students, y'all need to immediately go home, which they did. My husband was coming to South Africa to meet us as part of the journey. So we were kind of waiting for him, and then they went on lockdown. So we were locked down in South Africa for 4 to 6 weeks, and actually got out with an embassy flight. So we had the whole big adventure. But it was, I've been on semester at sea since then, and I wanted a COVID-free voyage, and it was very cool to have a COVID-free voyage. But I have to say, I have a special place in my heart for all my spring 2020 voyagers. We had a really unique experience, kind of going through that together of all the uncertainty and how do you cope, and, metaphor for life. And everybody has their COVID learning moments, and those were mine.
How old are your kids when you did that?
They were in middle school when we did it with COVID, and then we just did it again last year. So they were in high school by that time.
That is the coolest thing.
It's very cool. Yeah, it's very cool. So they've been to 22 countries, and mostly through educational venues, not just through luxury tours or whatever. So I love semester at sea. It's just such a great opportunity to see the world, but in an educational context, not just in a let's hit the beach context.
Yes, I did. I studied abroad in college, and I actually went a couple times in high school as well under the guise of studying Spanish, which I did study Spanish,
nice.
But I also just really wanted to travel.
Good for you.
And then the year after I graduated from college, I backpacked around the world and did humanitarian work in 12 different countries.
Oh,
So it was
nice.
similar. And I had some
Cool.
friends do semester at sea. So I'm totally familiar. And
Yeah, it sounds like it.
so
That's neat. I didn't know
that's
that
really
about you, Stephanie.
It's really cool. I'm like, oh man, I need to tell my husband that. He's gonna be like, okay, how do I
How
make
do
that
you get
happen?
on? Well, call me later and I'll tell you what I know.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. You guys, this is one of those moments. Okay, well, it is a massive honor to have you on the show today. I read your book, The Defining Decade, maybe 10 years ago.
Yep. Okay. The first edition came out in 2012.
Okay, yeah. I don't think I read it right when it came out, but I read it a couple years later, and I have recommended it to absolutely everybody. I have a book coming out actually at the end of April, and
cool.
so many. It's not about 20-somethings necessarily. It's more about kind of 25 to 35-ish, and so many of I really feel like the defining decade was such a push forward in that.
Good.
So I'm just so happy to have you on the show. I want to ask you to kind of get us started with why the 20-something years are so important. We kind of think they're this, but actually they're this. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So, I think for several decades now, really starting with my generation, I'm a Gen Xer. So adult milestones have begun to happen sort of later than they quote used to. And so it kind of led to this saying or this belief of 30's the new 20, that all the stuff that people used to do around the age of 20, back in the mid 1900s, they're now doing closer to the age of 30. So if 30's the new 20, then, whatever, what you do in your 20s doesn't matter. Actually matters a ton. And kind of to the point on your time frame that, I talk about working with 20-somethings, but really, 18 to 35 is just an enormous developmental sweet spot. So much is happening. So I'll rattle off some stats for you of all the stuff that happens by 35, but an estimated 80% of life's most defining moments take place by age 35. And, how can that be true? Well, we know that the jobs we have in our 20s, our learning curve at work in our 20s predicts our earning curve in our 30s and beyond. Average age of marriage is about 29 these days in the US. Average age of first child is about 30 these days in the US. About half of 20-somethings find their purpose by around the age of 30 or 35. We know that fertility peaks, somewhere in the years of 20s, early 30s. We know that the brain is capping off its last major growth spurt in the 20s, which makes it a great time to learn new skills and to really sort of develop as a person. And then related to the fact that so much about life is changing while your brain is changing, your personality changes more in your 20s than any other time in life because your brain is literally rewiring itself based on its experiences. So, people ask me all the time, why do you work with 20-somethings? And the answer to me is that's where all the action is. That if you want to get in on, people's most defining moments, that's when you work with them, is before they're making those or as they're making those decisions. So it's a super rewarding time to work with people. And it's a very easy time to change your life. So sometimes people panic and they say, oh no, I'm 29. I can't possibly change my life now. Not true. We all just have to start where we are. But, really anywhere in that 18 to 35 sweet spot, a lot can happen really quickly.
I'm a little stuck here because I truly have read your book several times. So
you're like, yeah, I know all that. Yeah.
No, I'm like, okay, well, how do I? Oh man, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. Can you give us just? I feel like the good news is that really, the paint is still wet. You really can change so much so quickly, as you just said. But I know that a lot of people come to your books and come to your like, office for therapy who are like with some like regrets about things that
Mm-hmm.
they maybe didn't do sooner. Can you give us just like a little bit of the like picture of what happens if we don't use
Right, right.
our 20s?
Yeah, I mean, it just, the longer you wait to do things, the more you have to do in a shorter period of time. So, I think, regret is something I wouldn't spend a ton of time on, because that's just sort of comparing, what you did to this fantasy of everything you could have done perfectly if only you had had perfect information, which none of us ever have. But I think that if you go by the 30 is the new 20 mantra, which I think most people know better these days, but if you take that literally, that means, oh, I can just start everything at 30 and still have time for everything. And you might, but it's going to be very crunched and you're going to have a lot to do in your 30s, a lot of really big stuff. So if you're interested in having a career, if you're interested in having a relationship, you're interested in having a family, to start all those things at 30, you are really, really going to have your feet to the fire all throughout your 30s, which is not fun. So, I really encourage people not to get all that stuff done by the time they're 30, but to certainly have started, sort of their long form projects of, what is it I think I want to do with my life? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to love? What does my family makeup look like? And, what am I waiting for? Why don't I get started? Doesn't mean you have to finish it all, but you should probably start it.
Yeah. I know that, with something like career, it's intimidating to go like, oh, I'm supposed to start my career right now. Like I remember reading that and going, well, I feel like I sort of made a mistake then because I spent several years in the very middle and really towards the end of my 20s doing jobs that paid like absolutely nothing. But one of the things you talk about is identity capital, not like you don't need to go out and be an Insta CEO. That's not what we're talking about. Tell us
Right.
what identity capital is.
Yeah, so identity capital is a really useful concept. It's not mine. It's just I'm the middleman that I kind of bring it to the population that needs to know about it most. But it's a really useful way to think about what you're doing with work in your 20s. Is you don't need to know who am I going to be once and forever, because careers don't even work that way anymore. So your average 20 something will have 9 different jobs by the age of 35.
I'm so tired hearing that.
I know. I feel like in my 20s, at some points, I felt like I had 9 jobs at one time. But so there's a lot's going to happen. And so you don't have to think about, is this it forever? Is this me forever? Just think about moving from one good piece of identity capital at a time. So that's really opportunities where you can learn and grow and sort of add value to who you are, add skills to your skill sets that you can take with you to the next job with the next bit of identity capital. So an example, semester at sea as an example, backpacking around the world as an example. So was my first job out of college was working as an outward bound instructor. And, it's probably not the most ambitious thing I could have done right after I graduated from University of Virginia, but I wanted some life experience. I wanted to see some of the world. I wanted to grow up some, have some responsibilities. And it ended up being a really good source of identity capital for me. I learned a lot about leadership and self-direction and managing groups and managing myself. And so when I, kind of when the capital on that had run out for me, I decided, okay, time for grad school. And I actually had an easier time getting into grad school, I think, than many other people, because I had done something really interesting with tons of identity capital. That was what everybody wanted to talk about when I did my interviews. So, when people hear identity capital, they think, oh no, I need to go work in a lawyer's office and have a briefcase. And that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. It depends on what do you want to do and what are sources of learning and growth for you.
Yeah. I wonder, when I was getting ready to go to college, I remember one time, I need to ask my mom what happened with this, but one time I sat down with like a college advisor or something, and I truly only met with him once. I remember him like leaning back in his chair and saying, "So what makes you an interesting person?" And I'm like,
Nice.
I am 17 and a half years old. Like I've been hustling my buns, trying to be in every sport, every, club, every whatever, trying to
Right.
make my resume as impressive as possible. And so I said like, well, I do this and I do this and I do this. And he goes, so does everyone else. What makes you interesting? And I just like
You're
totally
like,
deer in the headlights, had
right.
nothing to say.
Burst into tears, all those years of
Totally.
extracurriculars for nothing.
Yeah, like that. And that's the end of the story, truly. But I did, like, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, I wonder if it's less impressive and more interesting. That like it doesn't have to be like
Right.
whatever you want to put, or like whatever I thought that guy was going to be looking for on my, college
Resume.
applications.
Yeah.
It was,
Well, right. When I went to Berkeley to clinical psych PhDs, it's very competitive to get in. And so I think my year is probably the same now. They got about 500 applications and they take 5.
oh,
And so how do you get to be one of the 5? I mean, I was the only one of the 5. I mean, UVA is no slouch of a school, but I was the only one of the 5 that didn't go to an Ivy League undergrad. And a lot of them had research papers and posters at conferences and, had kind of done the resume impressive stuff. But, and I wouldn't have been able to compete just on those terms, certainly not after tromping around in the woods for 5 years. But, I had something that they didn't have, which was a lot of life experience. If you want to be a psychologist, I mean, you kind of have to know how to handle people in difficult situations
yeah.
more than you have to know, how to give a good poster session. So, so I think that idea of what makes you interesting is much more important than what makes you impressive, because, after people might find someone impressive, but they pretty quickly want to move on to interesting.
Yeah.
And, especially if they're going to partner with you or hire you, they want you to be an interesting person to have around.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things that you talk about, that the person I was talking to just before this is a dear friend of mine, Carly, and she was the one who gave me the defining decade. And she talks about the power of weak ties all the time. And she literally
Nice.
just mentioned it.
Oh, cool.
So can you tell us what that means? Because that is it's fascinating to me, what the power of weak ties.
Yeah, again, not my concept. So that title, so The Strength of Weak Ties, is the title of a paper, an important paper that was written, I think it was in the 90s, 80s. It was a while ago, long before there was such a thing as a social network. But it was really about the power of social networks and about how our strong ties to our closest family and friends, they might be our most supportive figures, but they're not our most transformative figures. That most of the big changes in our lives come from people who are outside of our inner circle. So those are called our weak ties. So that's like your old roommate's neighbor, your friend from camps, sister, the person you used to work for, the professor you used to have, the old roommate you used to have. It's just all the people that we know and all the people that they know. So it's, it's really kind of no end to our network of weak ties. But what's so cool about weak ties is that because they're far out in our social networks, they tend to be different than we are, because we kind of cluster together with people that are like us and people we talk to a lot. And so we're all kind of in agreement on everything and we know what everybody thinks already. But when you talk to weak ties, you get an opportunity to learn new information, have different ideas, different perspectives. So, I won't bore you with the details, but they've done some cool research about how, most people get leads from new jobs from weak ties. Because, I mean, you already know everything your best friend knows, but if you talk to someone new and you tell them, oh man, I'm looking for a job in this or that field, they'll say, oh, have you thought about calling such and such? Or, my sister used to do that. You should have coffee with her. And that's really how, that's where everything comes from. So if I think in my own life, about every apartment I ever had, every job, every good idea I ever had, everything that I've had has come from some conversation that I had with someone, a weak tie, that sparked something that I wouldn't have been able to come up with on my own.
I feel like, I mean, ideas are one thing, and exchanging information, but when it comes to like new jobs or apartments, or I mean even like dating,
Definitely,
it
yeah.
takes some, like, I guess, how do we use our weak ties? Because that feels weird. That feels weird to call my in-laws friend and be like, "Hey, got any jobs?"
I mean, it does take some courage, but it is how the world goes round. And so, I think I was also on something earlier today myself. I was giving a talk for a company for young workers, and I was saying, talk to people outside of your team, talk to people who are older than you in your company, talk to people at other companies that you're interested in. What do they do? I think, just being curious is a really good position in life. I mean, as a therapist, I try to be very curious about my clients' lives before I start telling them what to do. I think if you respectfully approach someone or reach out to someone and say, I'm really curious about what you do. I'm thinking about moving in that direction myself. Can I buy you coffee? Actually, I had a client who said she was having a hard time branching out socially. And I said, well, is there anyone who kind of does some cool things that you wish you did? And she said, yeah, so and so. I said, well, why don't you ask her for lunch and say, I'm really curious about how you get involved in all these cool things. I would like to do more of that. So, I mean, who doesn't want to hear that what they're doing is sort of worth emulating, or that people could learn from that? So I think what many people don't understand is that people who are in a position of quote power, they have something you want, whether it's a better social life or a better job. It's easy for them to help you. So, I mean, now that I know so much about 20-somethings or psychology grad school or whatever, it's very easy for me to help someone. And I'm generally happy to do it as long as I have the time. And I think, most people feel the same. And, maybe everybody doesn't, but you don't need everybody to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing, unless I come up with something else, that I want to ask you about from the defining decade, that is just like, you talk about I don't know if this is like the right umbrella for it, but well, okay, you talk about dating and how important it is how important it is to carefully select your future spouse, because people say you can't make your family, and you're like, no, but you can, and this is when you are.
When you do, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a big shift that happened. I mean, a lot of big shifts happen in your 20s, and that's why I love working with that age group. But one of the big ones is, you grow up your whole life hearing, well, you can't pick your family, but you can pick your friends. And that's true until you're about 25 or 30 or 35 or whatever point you decide that, hey, I want to create a family of my own. Like, you get to choose. Who do you love? How do you love? What does your family look like? What does my partner's family look like? You are suddenly picking the family that one day your kids are going to say, well, you can't pick your family, but you can pick your friends. You're picking it. So I think just that paradigm shift around, you actually do choose your family and choosing your partner and choosing what your family is going to be about and what it's going to look like and who your in-laws are. Those are your choices. So, to kind of help people realize that they can be as intentional about that as they are about work, that I think we all understand, graduate school would be useful, or I need to have 2 or 3 good jobs to really build up my skill level. But then relationships, we just kind of stumble around and like go with the energy or the chemistry, and can often maybe not be as thoughtful or as intentional about relationships as we are about work.
What are some things that realizing that I mean, that is a giant paradigm shift to go, like, you're dating right now, yes. Currently, if this is what you decide to do and this is how, like, and it all goes this way. Like you're choosing your kids' parents, other
Right.
parents.
Right.
Like that is giant. That is really hard to wrap our minds around. What are some things that like, therefore,
Right.
if
Therefore
you,
what?
yeah.
And now what? I think just an important thing to think about is, I mean, maybe this has gotten a little better, I would like to hope, since I wrote The Defining Decade. But I think for a while, it was a bit taboo to sort of take relationships seriously, that seemed like a little bit retro of, oh, what do you mean? You're in your 20s and you're talking about getting married, or you want to find a partner, or that just seemed kind of old school, and people weren't doing that anymore. And I think, or all that, like, I hear people say this a lot. Oh, I tell my kids not to get married till 30. And I'm like, I don't have a date on it of what is the right or wrong age. But I think when you say that, you're kind of inviting them to not take their relationships in their 20s very seriously, because they think like, oh, well, I'm not mature enough to really think about this till I'm 30. But I think it takes a lot of courage and to, listen to yourself and say, oh, I do want more than a hookup or a situationship or whatever the case may be. I want a partner. I think I want a family, and that might take some time. And so, I'm going to date someone carefully. And if things aren't going well, I'm going to listen to myself and change course the same way I would change a job. So, 9 jobs by the age of 35. I don't know if you'll have 9 relationships in your 20s, but it's a similar process, or it should be, where you try your best to choose a good one. But if it's not going well, you need to change course rather than feel like, well, I don't want to be alone, or, oh no, everybody's getting married, so I guess we're just going to do this. I had somebody tell me, last week of, oh, well, we've already been together 3 years, so I can't, end it now. And I said, so you're going to go 50 more? I mean, that makes no sense. That if, the data coming back is, this isn't making me happy, this isn't what I want, then it's time to, choose more wisely next time. Yeah. So one of my supervisors said something to me once, which is, the best time to work on your marriage is before you have one. And, that's really what my work with 20-somethings is about. It's not about, I don't have an agenda that people should get married younger or older or anything. That's really up to you to decide. But just that for people to work on their marriages before they have them, so that by the time they do have the family they've chosen, they feel good about it.
Yeah. I really love that. You have a new book coming out. Tell me again when it comes out.
Yeah, April 9th. It's called The Twentysomething Treatment, and the subtitle is A Revolutionary Remedy for an Uncertain Age.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it is explicitly 20-something mental health. So interestingly, when I was writing The Defining Decade, so that was, the first edition came out in 2012. The second edition of it came out in 2021, and actually has a whole big chapter on 29 conversations to have with your partner, by the way. So there's a lot of relationship stuff in there, a lot more social media stuff. But anyway, when I was writing the first edition, I'm a clinical psychologist, so I kept trying to talk about mental health. And my editor, kept saying that, no, don't do that. That, talk about stuff that your average 20-something can relate to. And I said, well, I hate to break it to you, but your average 20-something, has mental health struggles. I mean, as we do. But he said, just that's another book. Like, you want The Defining Decade to be sort of the what to expect when you're expecting of your 20s, your sort of post-graduation manual. And he was totally right about that. And he was totally right that people weren't really talking. I mean, other than psychologists, people weren't really talking about mental health, 15 years ago. I mean, the word was like just very clunky. No one was even using it. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, everyone is talking about mental health and young adult mental health, but some of the conversations are better than others. So I wanted to write something about what 25 years of working with 20-something mental health has taught me, that I could share, because I don't think the answer for everyone is finding a therapist. there aren't enough that are accessible and affordable. It's not a scalable profession. Most people don't need a therapist, but I tried to put in the 20-something treatment, what is kind of my age-specific approach to 20-something mental health and how I work with young adults specifically.
I'm so curious about that. So my background, both my parents are licensed psychologists, which is
Cool.
like a super
Okay.
weird thing. It's really not that weird, but I guess I'm the only one I know. And so I really have been entrenched in this mental health world, for my whole life. I feel like I would say everyone needs a therapist. Why not? And so
why not is because the money. I mean, that's why not. So everybody could benefit from a good therapist. I mean, everybody, because why not?
Right.
Most people cannot afford a good therapist. So the reason I've written books, this is my third book, and all of my books are really to say, this is everything I've got on this topic for $20 or a library card, because I really believe in, education as an intervention, and that a lot of people can be helped. Like you were saying, you felt very helped or impacted by the defining decade, and you didn't need to sit down one-on-one with me week after week to make that happen. So
so they could benefit from it, but it's not as realistic. So
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what are the things that you have, I guess, gosh, this is like an enormous question. Sorry about this. What are some of the things that you have learned about 20-somethings mental health that we need to get from this book?
Yeah, a couple of things. There's sort of three routes to better mental health that I talk about in the book and just in my work. One I just talked about is education, that a lot of people are helped just by understanding things better, understanding how the brain works, or how worrying works, or how decisions work, or how love works. That education can go a long way, and that you can get from a book. Another route to better mental health is expectations. And so a lot of people have heard, your 20s are going to be the best years of your life. Empirically speaking, your 20s are not going to be the best years of your life. That there's actually a J-shaped mental health curve that kind of goes throughout life, where from childhood down through teens into our 20s, our kind of well-being declines because life gets harder. We have to deal with more and more, and we're kind of overwhelmed by, the stressors outdo our coping. So mental health tends to bottom out in our 20s. And then the good news is it goes up from there. So life gets better, well-being, life satisfaction, mental health, depression, anxiety, pretty much all the measures get better in 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. So I think sometimes it helps for people to understand that they're not doing something wrong, that nothing is wrong with them, that, if you're struggling in your 20s, it doesn't mean you're always going to struggle. It's a very difficult time because so much is happening and so much is up in the air. And, I tell my clients, your 20s, probably aren't going to be the best years of your life, but you don't want them to be. Like if your 20s turn out to be the best years of your life, something has gone terribly wrong, because you really want, what you want to do in your 20s is lay the foundation for life just to get better and better. You don't want to peak in your 20s. So, so that's an important thing to understand, that it's very normal to struggle in your 20s, and we can talk a bit more about why that is. The third route that I talk a lot about in the 20-something treatment to better mental health is experience. And this is kind of goes back to the therapist question, that they did some interesting research on why do people get better in therapy. And so there's this, kind of cool pie chart that shows the factors. But the biggest slice of client improvement, so 40% of client improvement in therapy comes from outside factors. So the new job, the better roommate, the new friends, the different relationship with their family, the, kind of the outside life experience factors are actually what helps people be healthier and happier in their 20s. I mean, just talking about things only goes so far. So, I tell clients, mental health tends to get better when life gets better. And so as we kind of help our 20-something life along, our mental health will follow. But, in the years where you're trying to sort all that out, it can be really challenging.
Yeah. Why are our 20-something years so hard? You said we can talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of goes a little bit to the subtitle of the book, which is a revolutionary remedy for an uncertain age. And that is that our 20s are the most uncertain decade of life. And again, I'm speaking like 18 to 35-ish. But it's really the only time in your life where you'll wake up in the morning and you may not know where you'll live in 5 years, or if anybody's going to love you in 5 years, or if you'll ever have a family or be able to pay your bills, or if you're ever going to be happy, or what you're going to do for work. It's really the only time of life when you wake up in the morning and all of that is uncertain. And the brain does not like that. The brain perceives uncertainty as danger. And, then what follows: stress, anxiety, depression, substance use to cope, blah, blah, blah. So it's a very challenging time of life. It's much easier, take it from me, to be decades past your 20s. And of course, anything could happen tomorrow. I don't know. But I do wake up in the morning and I have the answers to those questions. I know who I'm going to be when I grow up. I know how many kids I'm going to have. I know who my partner is. I know that I can pay my bills. And that's psychologically a much easier place to be than wondering and worrying about whether that's going to happen.
Yeah. What are, like, if you could give every 20-something like 2 tools to hold on to get through these uncertain years, what would those be?
Well, see, now they would be these.
My 2 books. Thank you.
I just held
Thank
up
you.
for people who can't see. I just held up my 2 books. They would be those, because I'm really not peddling the book, but I genuinely, the defining decade is really about sort of making the most of your time, that it's a very important time developmentally. And here's everything I know about what to do with that time and how to think about that time. And then the 20-something treatment is really about, normalizing the fact that it's a difficult time and, kind of teaching people that mental health is going to get better as life gets better. And this is sort of how you can move that process along.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like in the defining decade, like, the tool I would pull from it probably is like, start now. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Start now.
Yeah.
And your whole future self will be so much happy, will like benefit so much from the imperfect start. You don't have to finish today, but just get started today.
Just start. Yeah. I mean, if you think about anything, whether you've got a paper to write that you're thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to write that 15 pages, or a workout to do that you think, like I really don't want to row for 40 minutes. It's always just start. Just start. That's always the answer. And then you can quit, you can change course, you can, see how it goes. But I mean, the answer is always to just start. So I do think that's a great takeaway from the defining decade. And I think for the 20-something treatment, it's really to, understand that that struggles are normal, and that it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, and that life can and will get better in your 20s and certainly beyond.
Is it the kind of thing where like I mean, I really appreciate that, because I think that having a problem is like one thing. Thinking your problem is a problem, like, compounds it,
Right.
Or thinking is your fault. Like, all of that just makes it so much worse. So I really appreciate that. Is it the kind of thing where, like, I know you said that our mental health gets better because of things outside the therapy room. So it's like when you get a better job, it gets better. Are there any specific things that you've found to like do this to improve your life outside of the therapy room, and your life will get better and your mental health will get better? Or is it kind of just like a waited out sort of thing?
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, time is probably on your side, but it's not really a wait it out because remember, it's experience. It's like life gets better probably because you do something to make life better, not just because life inherently gets better. So in the 20-something treatment, there's a whole middle section called, the first section's called Why Now, which is like, why are my dang 20s so hard, which we just talked about. And then the middle section is Now What? And there's 12 how-tos, and it's everything from how to think to how to feel, how to cook, how to move. I have how to have sex in there, how to love, how to work, how to befriend, how to be social, that I really go through all the ways that you are able and responsible to make your life better. So that then you'll feel happier and healthier. So it really is about, how do I do life? How do I do my 20-something life in a way that sort of builds up my mental health and builds my skills?
Yeah. I can't remember if this is from the 20-something treatment or if who knows where in my brain this came from. But something about how like confidence grows with experience. Like the more
Yeah.
you do something, the more like that's how you feel confident. That's in 20-something treatment,
Oh,
isn't
yeah,
it?
it's probably in both books because
Okay.
it's, kind of a central tenet that, you can't have confidence without experience. I mean, without success. So, I mean, you just have to, if you want to feel more confident on the job, I guess you better get to work, keep showing up. And so it's sort of ironically, some of our, most important mental health days aren't about taking the day off. It's about showing up and, you know, getting better at work, and that's where the confidence comes from. So it's that's part of the uncertainty that it's very anxiety provoking of all the things that are new. So most of the how tos in the 20-something treatment are things that are new. I don't know how to work. I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to make friends. I don't know how to think when I'm feeling stressed and anxious. So these are new for 20-somethings, and they're just skills that they develop, only, I mean, you can read the book, but then you got to go out there and do the things.
I kind of feel like what comes first, like confidence or experience, or like there's some sort of like chicken and the egg thing kind of there where it's like, well, do I need to feel confident before I get started, or do I feel
No,
confident
yeah.
because I got started? It's like, no. It's
Yes, that
there's
one.
no question. You have to
Yeah.
start, then you get confident.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, think about yourself, when you first learned to like dive off the side of a pool. Or so I think what you take in is courage. But I don't think people start with confidence. I think maybe they start with courage of like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep showing up for that job that I'm really feeling not confident about.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep trying dating, even though so far it's not working out. So I think what you take in is courage, but after enough of that and you have experiences and you have some successes, then you have confidence.
Yeah. I just, where my brain just went was like, well, where do you get courage? And then I just realized that courage is in the middle of the word encouragement. Like, I don't know why.
Right.
Never, like, that's obvious, but it's not that obvious. And so,
Right.
like, that can come from other people. That can, like, the person sitting by
Absolutely.
you at the pool being like,
Saying
you
you
can
can
do
do
this.
it. Like they're
Yeah.
literally giving you courage. That's
Yeah.
100% accurate.
I just never realized that about that word.
Yeah.
One of the things that you talk about, I know, is there are a couple strategies I want to just touch on really quick. One is thinking less about what if and more about what is. Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah. So one of the first how to in the book, so in that middle section, is how to think. And the reason that came first is because it's very important because we're just all thinking all day, every day. And how we think about things has a lot to do with, how we behave or how we perform in any situation. So we kind of got to get our reins around how we're thinking. And the most common, I mean, I guess it's quote a thinking error, but it's just a response, the most common response to uncertainty is to see it as danger and to see it as bad and to start sort of thinking catastrophically. So if you're feeling uncertain about, oh, my boss wants to talk to me, then, oh my gosh, what if he wants to fire me? What if he's mad at me? What if I did this? What if somebody told him I did that? I mean, it's all the what ifs. So this is normal.
Weird. Who would do that in their brain?
It is weird. Yeah. No, everybody does it. 20-somethings especially do it because they have more uncertainties than they have sort of like facts to hold on to. So, what if thinking, catastrophic thinking is all about fears, not facts. So it's very common for people to come in and say, so-and-so didn't text me back. What if this? What if that? What if the other thing? So that's what your brain is going to do naturally. And sometimes they'll say, how can you make that stop? And, maybe a lobotomy. I don't know, because this is what your brain needs to do. This is how we stay alive, is by kind of having that better safe than sorry, like, let me watch out for the dangers. So your brain is going to do that naturally. Your job is to sort of come in next and say, okay, the what ifs have been taken care of. Let me think not about the fears, but about the facts. So what do I know? So if I'm thinking, oh, a friend didn't text me back, they're mad at me, that thing I said the other day, I bet they didn't like it, all these what ifs, then you start to think about facts instead of, we've been friends a really long time. I can't really imagine that, we're not going to be friends anymore. And, maybe they're out of town, maybe they're busy, maybe their phone broke, that there's just other ways you can think about any situation other than the worst case scenario. So the what ising is thinking about the facts of, we've been friends a long time. I think we can get through this. But there's also the what else? What else could I tell myself besides my friend is going to ghost me? And there's always another way to look at things. And I don't know what the right answer is, and neither do you until you get further information. But we kind of have to do the work of putting the reins on sort of all the what ifing.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is like existing in the unknown without becoming undone, without coming undone. Any like strategies for the road for that?
Right. They've done some cool. So if you're going to be living with a lot of uncertainty, it's really understanding, and this is where education is an intervention, that it's normal for your brain to kind of think the worst and interpret that as danger. But uncertainty is not necessarily danger. I mean, uncertainty is really about possibility, that, if your job is uncertain and your relationships are uncertain, your life is uncertain, there's more than one possibility ahead. And that, that doesn't have to be an inherently negative thing. And so to think of it more about, embracing what's possible rather than fearing what's uncertain, just that kind of simple shift can be useful. And to spend some time thinking about the positive what ifs. What if this situation goes well? How would that look? And what do I need to do to get it there? Because we spend a lot of time thinking about what if I never can pay my bills? What if I never find anyone? What if I never, find purpose? What if I never have a job that I like? And our brain does that all day long, but we don't carve out enough space to say, what if my career did go well? What would that look like? Or what if I found a partner that made me feel valued or safe or secure or whatever it is? What would that look like? So to really take up space in your brain, using that uncertainty, but imagining the good things and not just the bad things.
I love that. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was, I know that with there being so much talk about mental health these days and with it being so much more of a mainstream thing, one of the chapters that you have talks about medication not always being the best medicine. And like maybe potentially we are overdiagnosing ourselves on TikTok or something.
Right. Maybe.
Talk to me a little bit about like what you see happening and what's coming from it.
That's really important. So, I mean, I'm a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. So for people who don't know, psychologists tend to have more sort of behavioral interventions, and psychiatrists are medical doctors who use medication. So I am a skills over pills kind of gal. I mean, that's the way that I'm trained. And that doesn't mean that I don't think medication is never useful or never important. But I do think that it's not always the best solution, or not necessarily the first step that, really most people should take. I mean, there's a whole chapter about it. I hope you read it. But, a few things to understand about medication is that medications have side effects. So, sometimes they can solve one or two problems, but leave us with another couple problems. They can be dangerous when mixed with other substances, and a lot of 20-somethings use substances. And that, medications don't teach us anything. And so they might sort of help symptoms of depression or anxiety, but that in and of itself is not helping us kind of gain new skills. So whether someone is on medication or not, I really sort of encourage them to get out there and develop the skills that they need that kind of leave them feeling sort of depressed or anxious or stressed in the first place. About diagnosis, I think there's something called the nocebo effect, which is pretty interesting. So the placebo effect is when you think you'll get better from something, so you do get better. I mean, everybody's heard of the placebo effect. The nocebo effect is really the opposite of like, well, I don't think I'm going to get better, so I don't, because I don't try, because I don't think I will, and I think it's hopeless. And negative expectations do affect your brain chemistry and your choices, blah blah blah. So I think when too many 20-somethings, when they have struggles, they're looking for some kind of certainty, and they go on TikTok or wherever, they find a diagnostic label, and it's like, yes, I am this, I have this. And maybe they're imagining there's a pill that will fix it. But, often neither of those are the case. That I think sometimes kind of getting your identity really tangled up in a diagnosis in your 20s can not serve you, because you can feel like that there is something wrong with you, rather than, I'm struggling. Life is difficult. The 20s are difficult. And, the opposite of the nocebo effect is the power of positive expectations. And as we talked about earlier, I mean, the data show life is probably going to get better, that much of the depression or anxiety or stress or substance use that 20-somethings commonly struggle with is temporary, it's situational, and it does tend to get better, especially if people engage with the situations that they're having a hard time with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there any just last something I didn't ask about, or just a little bit of encouragement you can leave our listeners with?
Well, I mean, I think what we were ending on, which is that, the 20s, I mean, they're a uniquely wonderful, but also uniquely difficult time. And that, on average, people do feel better across their 20s and then beyond their 20s. So, I mean, life really does get better as you go.
I love that. I love that. That's so encouraging. I'm so grateful for your work. I'm going to be linking to your books on our show notes and sharing them, and I will continue to buy them for everyone I know.
Thank you.
Really, really. Dr. Meg Jay, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun, Stephanie.